Welcome to the Legal Insurrection Podcast, and we're here to bring you updates for the week of July 15th. In this episode, we're going to talk about the failed assassination attempt of President Trump, what's going on with the criminal charges against President Trump. We have the RNC happening this week, a vice presidential pick, Biden still not doing much better, proving that he is mentally able and capable and up for another 4 years of the job, and what's going on in the Supreme Court. So we have a lot to cover this week. I'm Kimberly Kay. I'm the editorial and operations director with the Legal Insurrection Foundation, and I'm here with our president and founder, Professor Jacobson. So let's jump on in. So of course, I feel like this week we have an entire news cycle that's happened every single couple of hours each day. It's like trying to drink from a fire hydrant with everything that's happened since we talked last week. Why don't we start first with the assassination attempt? And I want to just personally thank you for the video that you shared, that you can also find in our streaming channels, of your hot take on this shortly after it happened. I think it mirrored much of what many were feeling, or at least the consensus that I was seeing. So if y'all are listening, you can find that in our channels. But I have thoughts about this, but I want to turn this over to you, Professor Jacobson. What are your thoughts now that we've had a couple of days? We're starting to get this, I wouldn't call it a trickle because there's just so much information coming out. What are your thoughts on all of this now that we've had a couple of days for this to simmer? What's this looking like? How many more questions do you have? Just your general thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, just a few days out, I'm feeling like we're never going to get an answer to how this happened, why it happened, who this person was. Every day, every hour, as you indicate, seems to come out some very strange report. Of course, it's always hard to know what's real and what's not. But the Secret Service was beyond abysmal here, almost clownish. This can't be real. There's something wrong here. And you know, talking about they didn't put somebody up on that roof because it was sloped. I mean, is this serious? The chronology of him reportedly, and I again want to emphasize reportedly, having been stopped because he had a rangefinder on him. I mean, my God, what else do you need to say? I'm here to shoot the president. I have a rangefinder on me. Seriously. And they don't pull him aside? I mean, try bringing a rangefinder through security at the TSA checkpoint in any airport. You're going to get pulled aside. You're going to be questioned. Nothing happened here. This is the most bizarre circumstance. And of course, that's going to feed all sorts of conspiracy theories. But as we know from the past several years, what's a conspiracy theory today, 6 months from now, could be reality and the truth. So I guess that's my overwhelming feeling, that as big a deal as this was, I think the government's already in shutdown mode. I don't think we're ever going to find out what happened here.
I think there's probably a reason for that. I mean, I'm not sure what a conspiracy theory is anymore, right? Because like you said, I mean, it's one of those things that conspiracy theories seem to be just ahead of the headlines these days. But I mean, there's just so many questions. I think my initial reaction, of course, to this was shock. We've talked offhandedly about how everyone believed this was an inevitability. At some point, they're going to take a literal shot at him, given the rhetoric, given everything that's at stake right now, electorally, culturally, financially, all of the above. So, but to see that play out in real time is something very different. And at least for me, reminded me of 9/11 as you're watching this happen real time, and you're seeing it play out, but you're kind of also struggling to process that this is a thing that's actually happening. My initial thought, without knowing much about it, is that obviously this guy is not a lone gunman. He was very good. I mean, we've seen at least speculation for the fact that if Trump had not turned his head at the precise moment that he turned his head, the shooter was aimed like square in the middle of him, and we would have seen his head blown off on live TV. Thank God that did not happen. But I think there's so many questions here. And then, of course, we find out that he was in this BlackRock ad a year ago. I mean, I don't even, and I know I've shared this in some of our channels, but it's like you sit here with red strings trying to connect the dots here because there's just so many things that you're going, are these things even real? And how do you piece this information together? What information will they be willing to share? This guy was obviously working with someone else. He had radios, he had other things who we may never know, at least not in our lifetime. But I think what is at least apparent is the complete failure of the Secret Service here in every single way, and how they handled it. It just was beyond a debacle. I don't even know if there's a word that exists that accurately sums up their failures here.
One of the things that made me very suspicious right away was that a lot of people are saying, 130 yards, 150 yards. For someone who's experienced, that's like the easiest shot in the world. I don't know if I'm buying that, okay? And that, you're not hitting the side of a deer. I mean, he would have hit him right in the head, okay? The death shot. Okay, that was a very accurate shot, and more than one of them were very accurate. And he's on a roof, and there's distractions, and he just climbed up there, and all those things. To me, as a total layman, I would say that's like a professional shooter. That's not your average person who's just trying to hit a deer in the side. Now, I could be wrong. Maybe I don't understand enough about scopes and how you can zero in. But that's what struck me immediately, is that he's what I consider to be a reasonable distance away. And unless he's a trained sniper, or he's got military training, or he's been trained somehow, that doesn't strike me as the easiest shot in the world. Okay, and he put it right on center. Now, I've seen those simulations also. If Trump hadn't turned, I'm a little suspicious of those. I've seen other explanations that say he probably wasn't that. What it was is that he was using a light, bullet, and it didn't account for the wind speed and should have adjusted. But all of these things, it's just way too strange. And then we have, if you remember what I posted Saturday night, and then it became not real, but in the New York Times, Saturday night I posted that back in March, there had been warnings by the FBI official about on the lookout for a senior Iranian intelligence figure who was in Florida or had been seen in Florida, that the FBI believed was trying to recruit people to assassinate former U.S. government officials. And nobody was talking about that. They're still not talking about that. They're saying, this recent news about the Iranians, it just came out. No, it didn't. It was in March. And I posted Saturday night that I don't have any idea if this is connected, but this is really suspicious. And I don't know if we'll ever find out if there was a connection. That's something the intelligence services are going to have to pick up signals or whatever. But my speculative conspiracy theory is that somebody put this kid up to it. That he may not even I absolutely know who was doing it.
Well, and I think that's likely because this reads like a John Grisham novel, right? It's like, so now we have a foreign interest involved. Okay, who next? Because it's not like these people haven't been targeting him from the beginning. His enemies have been his enemies for at least the last 8 years. So yes, obviously, when it's looking like he's about to be nominated as the candidate for the Republican Party, I guess the stakes are a little bit higher and they might be trying to head this off at the pass. But he has amassed a tremendous number of enemies, far more than other presidents that we've had, because of what he stands for, who he is, and what he has done. And so, I don't know, to me, it's like I see this Iran thing pop up. And yes, it's probably a legitimate threat. I'm not sure if that's at all part of the story, or if, or if that's a rabbit. I don't know. It's all very strange, though.
and I'm not saying he was connected, but I
Mm-hmm.
think it's very interesting that there was a foreign government which wanted to get him, said many times they would retaliate because he's the one who ordered the strike on the senior uh, Iranian general, who commander of the Iranian, I forget what they're called. I'm just blanking out. But the IRCG,
Mm-hmm.
Revolutionary Guards, and they said they wanted to retaliate. They've been saying that for years. And he's the one who ordered the strike. And the FBI puts out an alert in March that they're trying to recruit people to assassinate former senior government officials. Now, the most senior former government official who gave the go-ahead to kill Soleimani is almost assassinated by somebody nobody's ever heard of, by somebody who has almost no, as far as we can tell, internet trail, and who does not appear to have a history of any of this that we know of. I mean, for these school shooters, there's usually a history. They had problems. They had disciplinary problems. Uh, Nothing on this guy. You know, I used to read John le Carré books growing up, and this is like very strange. I'm not saying this was some sort of operation to get Trump, but the least likely thing right now seems to be that some 20-year-old kid with no history of this gets off a marksman-like shot from the top of a building at the President of the United States, and that's the
Mm-hmm.
whole story. That seems
Well,
very odd to me.
150 yards away is not an easy shot. I mean, that's a very that's it, it's not an easy shot, but it's also not terribly difficult, especially if you're elevated at the same level as the target. So, I mean, it's not going to be as easy as walking up to someone, of course, but depending on the rifle you have, depending on the equipment you have, especially when you have, as he had, ample time to get settled and centered and set up because no one seemed to notice he was there, or if they did, no one seemed to care. Um, it's not a terribly difficult shot to make, but it's not necessarily the easiest either. But I think really, at least where we are with all of this, and I think we've both said this already too, is that it's just there's so many more questions and answers if we will ever have answers to any of this. So I mean, I'm not really sure where this leads, or if what is finally divulged is even going to be the truth. So, which is another problem too. Who knows what's true and what's not anymore? Who knows who's trying to cover for whatever. I mean, they're supposing he is connected with someone else, and I believe he is. I don't think this is just a lone gunman situation. They're not going to do this in such a way where it would be easy to trace this back to them unless they're really stupid. So I don't think there's a strong likelihood that we will ever find out who's ultimately responsible for this, which is sad. We should have these answers because people know, someone out there knows, lots of people out there presumably know, at least who's connected to this. But unfortunately, we, the American public, do not. So do you have any more thoughts on that, and where this is now, and what the political ramifications might be after that incident?
The only other feeling I have is how quickly the media has moved on. I mean, there's no soul searching in the nation. There's no national conversations being held. The round the clock coverage pretty much petered out Monday morning. There's still incidents. There's still bits and pieces of reports being covered, but the outrage and the rolling nonstop coverage seems to be pretty much over. And that's another thing
Well,
that's astounding.
well, and I think one of the things too, I mean, and this is typical of narcissistic behavior, right? Is that you have, obviously a very politicized, very polarized political atmosphere right now. But with all of the rhetoric and all of the terrible things for years, they've been talking about Trump being assassinated, using all kinds of language that Republicans have always been told, or even people on the right have always been told, that are dog whistle language if you use a term like bullseye. Well, this is everywhere. Biden's even using this language himself. And then this happens, and they're the ones that turn around and say, okay. Everyone just needs to calm down, like they bear no responsibility for their role. And I'm not going to say that they're directly responsible for an assassination attempt, but for the heated rhetoric and for creating a climate where something like this is absolutely plausible. Yes. You have the representative of the party and the president himself talking about putting a bullseye on Trump. That's not inconsequential. There are ramifications for the prolonged use of language like that. And I think it's plausible that at least created a culture in where something like this is not shocking, right? It is shocking to watch, but that it happened, I don't believe shocks anyone, that someone made an attempt. So, I think that's one of the things, too, that I wanted to touch on that I think has been noticeable is that Trump's tone seems to have changed substantially since this happened. And so I think what we're seeing now, and I'm sure an experience like that, you cannot come out of it not being changed. I think it would be very strange if that had been the case. But Trump's tone seems, I don't want to say more somber, but he seems a little bit less lighthearted and name-calling like he used to always be in all of his tweets. Well, he doesn't tweet anymore, but Truth Social now. And even his countenance and his presence when you see him on stage, when you see him making statements now, it just seems a little bit more serious, but it also seems a lot more emboldened to me. And I don't think that any of those are bad things. I'm not saying I wish this something would have happened at all. Definitely not saying that. But I do think it's been an interesting shift in his tone and his tenor that I think is only going to serve him well, because we talked about this in one of the first segments, that we did here about our debate predictions. And I know one of the things that I mentioned was that he's going to have to find that sweet spot between being a solid fighter and also toning down the rhetoric a little bit. And it seems like he may have found that spot now and be a little bit more focused, and to see the longevity of that change and what that ends up looking like as we continue to move through this election season. But so kind of in that vein, let's talk about his vice presidential pick that was supposed to have been Tuesday and ended up being Monday. What are your thoughts on that?
On J.D. Vance, I didn't really know much about him. Yes, I'd seen him on TV. I knew a little bit. Didn't really know much about him. So to me, when he was announced, it was kind of a shrug of the shoulders. I'm much more familiar with Glenn Youngkin from Virginia, and I thought he might be a logical, strategic choice. He's never really had a conflict with Trump. He would help tremendously in a critical state. Republicans haven't won Virginia in decades, but Democrats can't really win without Virginia. Okay, they need Virginia a lot more than Republicans do. And if you had a vice president, who helped, now I know a lot of people say, vice presidents never swing a state, whatever. It might have made a difference. So I was a little bit surprised. I didn't see any benefit to him in naming, I forget who the other contenders were, Marco Rubio, or I don't even remember who else was on the short list. We'll see. I'm open-minded about him. I think what I've seen so far in, the less than 2 days since it was announced is fine. Nothing against him. He seems to be a likable person. Seems to come across well, and he seems to have a good rapport with Trump. And I think that rapport is something that wouldn't have been there with Youngkin. And I think that's probably important. Obviously, a very bright guy, a very interesting, personal history that I think everybody knows about. And his wife's very compelling. And I think, the one thing I'm really interested in the most is what's in his high school yearbook that we don't know about. Because it's only a matter of time before the Democrats get to the high school yearbook.
Yeah, well, we'll leave that to your Rhode Island Senator Sheldon Whitehouse to get to the bottom of that. One of the things I think is very interesting about this pick, I don't really, I care less about the electoral strategy here and more about what this says about the direction of the Republican Party. And I think what's really interesting about this pick is you have another newcomer. You have someone else who is what I would argue outside of the establishment, because even the people who came in the Tea Party wave, with the exception of probably Rand Paul, once you're in the system long enough, you become part of the system, whether you like it or not. And these people end up spending so much time in D.C. that they end up going back home and they're completely out of touch with their constituency. They have no idea how to relate to people and what's going on there. And it's the nature of the political system. And so I found it very interesting, though, that of all the people that he picked, he tried Pence the first time around, and that relationship seemed very forced and contentious from the beginning. But I think that was probably a selection done at least in part to allay any concerns about the fact that Trump was a political outsider and needed someone in his inner circle who had dealt with politics, at least at a very, very high level, being a governor. And he just went a totally different direction this time. And J.D. Vance is young. Trump is obviously not. I think that's a smart pick, too. Like you said, I think he has a very compelling story. I think he approaches this in a way similar to Trump, or he seems to be approaching politics in a way similar to Trump, which is that he was a businessman first. He understands things in a way that politicians who've been career politicians just don't, or politicians who've worked their way through the judicial system or the state house or whatever. Their job is always to continue to get elected. And so I'm curious to see how this plays out. He hasn't had a lot of face time. I am looking forward to that debate with Kamala Harris, though. I think that should be highly entertaining, if nothing else, which, politics shouldn't be entertaining. This is the country hanging in the balance here. But I do think what this says is that,
on that, just as we were starting to tape this, the Trump campaign announced that they can't agree to the date in August that the Democrats had proposed, because it's not really clear who the vice presidential candidate will be, because it's not very clear who the presidential candidate will be. And it would be unfair to Governor Newsom and Governor Whitmer and the other possible VP nominees to pigeonhole them into a date at this early stage.
Which is a perfect
response. It's kind of the perfect response.
It really is. To put it back on the uncertainty of their own ticket before agreeing to anything on their end. I think that is brilliant. But I think, to me, the largest takeaway is that we have now a Republican ticket that never would have been able to exist pre-2016. Like, there's no way. And I think it's an indicator, too, of who Trump is and what he's ultimately done to the Republican Party. And I know that the Wall Street Journal had a piece comparing him to Andrew Jackson. And there were a lot of those comparisons floating around in the 2016 election, too, because he's just kind of almost come out of left field as being someone who's not interested in doing things the way that anyone has done them in the past. He obviously cares for our country, and he loves our country and is very patriotic, has always been that. But his interests seem to be more wholeheartedly with the people than with the system, where even some of the best Republicans are more interested in working with the system instead of the people. And so I think it's just a new and exciting time for the Republican Party, and also for the Democratic Party, who continues to struggle with the progressive beast that they have birthed. and all of the young ones coming up, are, like we talked about last week, are so progressive. They're difficult to control, which puts them in a very difficult situation across the board. One of the things Democrats rely on is that there at least is some collective consensus to take a step back and work for the greater good. So when you have people like the so-called crew who don't do that, that's going to pose problems for them moving down the road. And I'm curious to see how that plays out too. But let's move on to, let's talk about some legal things. What about what's going on? So we also had another huge thing happen in Florida this week. And this whole mess of lawfare that Trump is dealing with. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'm sorry, you broke up there. I didn't hear what you asked.
Yes, so in Florida, we had probably what was one of the most dangerous legal challenges that Trump was facing was dismissed. And so can you discuss that a little bit?
Yeah, so the Florida case is the one that I felt presented the greatest risk to Trump. And I've written that many times on the website. I've spoken about it on different media, that the Alvin Bragg case in Manhattan, even though it did end up with the guilty verdict, should not hold up on appeal. It was a nearly frivolous legally frivolous case. And while it did end up being a guilty verdict, I can't imagine it's going to survive the appeals process. The Georgia case is similar to the DC federal case, which is their conspiracy theories, their conspiracy charges. And I've never believed that those carried a lot of weight, because what was the illegal purpose of the conspiracy? To overthrow an election. But that's not illegal. Overthrowing an election is not in and of itself illegal. So I've always felt that those cases were based on sound. But Florida was fairly straightforward, particularly once they introduced the obstruction of justice charge. The claim that while under subpoena, Trump ordered people to move around records to hide them. Fairly straightforward. And so I always felt that that was the greatest risk to him. But the judge just threw out the case on really following up on something Clarence Thomas had put in his concurring opinion in the immunity case, which is it's highly questionable whether Jack Smith, the special counsel, was constitutionally appointed. He's not been confirmed by the Senate, and there is no law that specifically allows for that appointment. There are laws that the Department of Justice say broadly allow it, but there is no specific law like there used to be when it used to be called independent counsel. So there used to be something called the independent counsel, and there was an independent counsel law that enabled the Department of Justice to appoint an independent counsel. And that law expired. It had a sunset date on it, and it was so controversial that they decided not to continue it. There was no replacement. There is no specific law. And what the judge found, picking up on what Clarence Thomas said, is that because Jack Smith was not confirmed by the Senate and was not appointed pursuant to a specific congressional authorization, that's unconstitutional, because you cannot have the departments creating new officer positions. That's something that is vested in the Congress. And so separation of powers, and she threw it out. Everybody's screaming and moaning, it's terrible, but we know we have at least one justice on the Supreme Court who agrees with her in the way I've been describing it to people. Clarence Thomas paved the road, and Eileen Cannon drove down it to get to this result.
No, I 100% agree, and thank you for sharing your analysis on that too. And I know, what a week for Trump. He survives an assassination attempt, is officially nominated as the party's next presidential candidate, And then his biggest, most dangerous legal challenge is summarily dismissed. So, and then another one put on hold indefinitely, right? Because of the Fannie Willis situation.
Yeah. What a mess Georgia is. Georgia,
Yeah.
the question that slowed down to a halt the case is whether Fannie Willis can continue to be the prosecutor because of her affair with one of her subordinate prosecutors and arguably funding her boyfriend with state money. And does she have a conflict? And the judge rendered a very curious ruling that this was several months ago, that yes, there is a appearance of a conflict of interest here to have both Fannie Willis and her boyfriend be the two prosecutors on the case. And the judge said one of them has to go. And then the most bizarre thing I've ever seen, the judge let them decide which one was go. That's not how it works. If two people get arrested holding up a bank, you don't say, okay, we're only going to prosecute one of you, and you get to decide which one. And that's what it. And so the boyfriend bowed out after having received like $600,000 in state money, and Fannie Willis is continuing to fight to stay in it. And of course, that begs the question of why is she so adamant about staying in this and keeping the case in, I think it's Fulton County, because if it's transferred to another DA, it would go to another county. Why is she so invested in it? And that's the whole problem in the case, is that this is Fannie Willis's case. This is a case that probably no other prosecutor would have brought. It's just like Alvin Bragg. And so if she doesn't stay in it, the case probably fades. No other prosecutor wants this case. And so that's where we are in Georgia. And they just set oral argument for December, which means we're not, I mean, that was obviously a very deliberate decision by the Court of Appeals in Georgia to not have their decision influence the election. They didn't want to be played that way. And so it'll be December 5th, the oral argument. Who knows when they'll decide it. And they may not even decide it before the inauguration in January 2025. And at that point, they may just say, well, we're going to put this on the back burner. We'll get to it when we get to it. And then there will be, of course, issues about can you continue a prosecution of a sitting president? So I don't think they want to deal with it. But it's not happening before the election. None of the cases, other than Alvin Bragg, are getting to trial before the election.
Which is very interesting that all of this has kind of snowballed in the matter of days. I mean, it's only Wednesday, right? It's Wednesday. So also happening today, Biden seemed to have given himself a back door for this whole not stepping down thing, which I think is very interesting. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so there have been before the assassination attempt, there were increasing calls for him to step aside, not to step down as president, which is really what he should do given his condition, but to withdraw from the race. And that kind of died down, sorry for the bad pun, that died down after the assassination attempt on Trump. And there were 2 or 3 days where there was a lot of talk. Democrats are going to lay low. Now's not the time to throw Joe overboard. But today, more Democrats are speaking up. Oh God, you can tell it's late in the day. Maybe I've purged his name from my memory. But the guy from California,
Newsom, Gavin Newsom,
Adam Schiff, called.
Schiff.
He's an influential person. I'm sorry.
No, I was saying yes, Adam Schiff.
Yeah, he's running for Senate, I think, out there. And obviously, it being California, whoever's the Democrat nominee is likely to get it. And so he's an influential person in the party, called on Biden to step aside. Reportedly, Chuck Schumer went to the White House, or if not physically, but delivered the same message to Biden. But the little nugget that came out today was in an interview with some outlet. When pressed about what might make him leave, he said, well, if a medical condition were to arise. Now, I don't think that means he's necessarily setting himself up to use that as the excuse, but that is in many ways the perfect off-ramp for him. The least humiliating off-ramp for him would be, I've been informed that it would not be safe for my health. No one would really believe that, okay, but it would be a non-humiliating way. It would allow the Democrats to rally around Sick Joe, that sort of thing. So that was interesting that he raised that, because that is the perfect off-ramp for him if he wants to take it.
Yeah, and it's the first time that, at least to my memory, we have seen him even suggest there might be a possibility in which he would step down, to even give himself that caveat that, if for some reason this happens, then I would consider it, because up until this point, he has not said that.
Well, he did say that if someone could present him with conclusive evidence that he cannot win, that he would consider it. That was the only prior, but he also said, but nobody's shown me that yet.
Right, right.
In fairness, the public polling doesn't show that it's over. I mean, it shows Trump up, it shows Biden in trouble in key states, but it's July, okay?
Yeah, for sure.
The Democrats, though, know something we don't, because they are petrified, and that's really the issue. The Democrats must have their own internal polling, internal, likely voter turnout models, which could be everything here, enthusiasm models, electoral counts, and because Florida is solid red now, because Ohio is pretty much solid red now. Those used to be two major swing states. They're gone. They're red now. Biden has very little room for error. If he doesn't win Pennsylvania, he's done. He cannot win without winning Pennsylvania. And that's why, Virginia could have been a big blow to him as well.
No, I mean, I think those are excellent points. So is it your sense, though, that it seems like with every passing week, we've been talking about this for 2 weeks now, with every passing week, there's mounting pressure, and it seems like this whole Biden stepping down situation continues to escalate.
Yeah, I don't know how he stays, but he can if he wants. I mean, I can't imagine they're going to pull some rule change shenanigans at the convention. Are they really going to do that? He did get the votes to be the nominee. So I think right now the betting is still it's going to be Joe, but there is mounting pressure on him to get out.
No, I agree. Let's move on to Biden wasting no time in attacking the Supreme Court again. I mean, it's one of those things that's been very interesting to me to watch, because Biden being part of the Obama administration, their lack of respect for our institutions and the separation of powers. I mean, I remember when Obama, his shtick was pretty much the same. He would get up, he would threaten, he would use very harsh rhetoric, he would demand that Congress do something. Congress never did the thing. So then he would essentially rule by fiat and govern through bureaucracy, especially with immigration. And so Biden has not really, at least as far as I can tell, has not governed through agency anywhere near as much as Obama did, but he's constantly after the Supreme Court. And so, in a time when they're lecturing the whole world about calming down political rhetoric, he's out here talking about how they're going to reform the Supreme Court. And I know you wrote an article on this last night. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, attacking the Supreme Court seems to be their go-to thing. And I don't think it's necessarily Biden. He's put a little bit of the brakes on it. It's the senators. It's the base, so to speak. It's Sheldon Whitehouse. It's a few other senators. They are just furious that the one institution they can't control is the Supreme Court. And so really we know about Chuck Schumer's gross intimidation of the justices. We know about the encouragement of people protesting outside their homes. Sheldon Whitehouse is demanding a criminal investigation of Justice Thomas. it's really ugly stuff. And, I think they've got a mental problem with it. I really do. I mean, they are so obsessed with the Supreme Court. And that's what they're coming back to. And that I don't think is Biden. I think that's either his advisors or it's just the pressure that, the same people who want to destroy the independence of the Supreme Court are the people Biden's going to need the support of to avoid getting pushed aside and staying in the race. And so I think that the increasing drumbeat of vilification of the Supreme Court is what's motivating this. And Biden is simply reacting to his base demanding to destroy this independence of the Supreme Court. The rumor is they're going to propose term limits, which of course they have no power to do. You'd have to pass a constitutional amendment because these are life appointments. Talking about imposing an mandatory ethics code on the Supreme Court. I'm not sure if they have the power to do that. It would be unprecedented. But nobody should think that's because they want ethics in the Supreme Court. That's simply a vehicle for lawfare. So once you impose those sort of codes on the Supreme Court, now you can start alleging violations of the code. So that's all they want. They want to do to the justices what they've been doing to Trump. They want to tie them up in litigation, tie them up in lawfare, get them to recuse themselves, and destroy the integrity or the reputation of the court because they don't like the way the court's ruling. And that's really what it's all about. It's the Democrats trying to destroy what they can't control.
No, and I mean, you answered my next question, which was why? Why are they so obsessed with the Supreme Court? I mean, I think you explained that incredibly well. So any closing thoughts this week? I mean, it's been quite a week. There's been so much that's gone on.
My only closing thought is I hope that what we've just talked about survives until at least tomorrow, because we don't know what's going to happen. I think what we've talked about will have a little bit of an evergreen value, but who knows what's going to happen? It's the crazy. And from our blog, it's like the old days. I mean, I'm actually enjoying it. Fast-moving events, and for whatever it's worth, our traffic is way up. We're not there yet, but we're almost back to the good old days. So we're enjoying it. And give a shout out to Mary, who's been keeping up with the ever-changing daily bombshells that are dropped, every hour on the hour.
It's true. There's been so much to cover, so many moving parts. But this is part of why we enjoy what we do, aside from being able to, and the other work that we do, cause change and, create an impact. It's fun to be part of this. It's fun to observe. It's just a good time. Election seasons are always a good time. They're nasty times sometimes, but they're always at least entertaining. So, I think that is all for this week. And if I want to thank you for listening, please be sure to share this if you enjoyed it. Like it, share it with people, ask them to like it as well. And you can find more about us, more about Legal Insurrection, all the work that we do there at legalinsurrection.com/3. Thanks again, and we will look forward to chatting next week.